Thank you, John. Let me tell you this story. My grandkids came by last Sunday, and now we were going to go out to eat, and we had a little time, so I made them sit down, and I like to tell them stories. Now I'm sure I've told them the same story many times, but when you get my age, you don't care anymore. You just tell them. You hope they remember it. But I had one that I thought they had not heard. And this has to do with our nation, too, as to the changes that I have seen and many of you have seen throughout our nation. Back in September of 1989, I kind of felt like my dad wasn't doing very good, and I didn't think he was going to last very long. So in September of 89, I living in Norman, Oklahoma, and I drove by myself and went to eastern Arkansas. And I usually take the boys and Ruth, and I said, I would just me and him for a week. And so we drove around that week, and we stopped at the places he wanted to stop at, had the coffee with people. He kind of had a routine, and we'd go fishing. We'd go out and fish every day, and we'd catch fish, and then we'd take them to somebody. And we'd go a different direction each day. And he started telling me these stories. Just like I said, many of them I'd heard. But there's one story I had not heard. And we were coming north of home there down the road, and I drove him everywhere. And he pointed up and he said, Bobby, you see that house up ahead? I said, yeah. He said, son, we used to live there. And I didn't know that. I'd been by that house, not every day or anything, but a number of times. And I didn't know. He said, yes. He said, you know what I remember about that, son? I said, no, what's that, Dad? He said, my father, which would be my great-grandfather, Papa Ed we called him, and I was coming back from town. And it's 3 miles to town, and we were walking, and said, Papa was stuck his hand in his pocket, and he started feeling something, and there was 3 cents in there. And he said, son, talking to my dad, we're going to have to go back to town. He said, why, Papa? He said, well, you know that piece of candy I bought you? Well, the merchant gave me 3 cents too much in change, and I've got to take it back. He said, well, Papa, can we do that tomorrow? He said, oh, no, son. I couldn't sleep tonight if we didn't take that 3 cents back. So they walked back to town in the heat, 3 miles, and then 3 miles back home. That's the way your great-grandfather or your grandfather was. Not just mine, but yours was like that. And that's what they represented, the integrity in their life, is that he was not going to rest until he got that 3 cents. But, 3 cents then was a little more than what it is today. But nevertheless, it's not a whole lot. But that is just the character that our ancestors had. And we should be proud of that. The word today, and we're going to kind of hit this in the lesson when it talks about oath and so on, the word today is not any good. It just, when people tell you something, they tell you what probably you want to hear. But if you're trying to set up a schedule or get somebody to come to do some repairs or something like that, you have no idea whether they're going to be, how good their word is. Now, they have good intentions, but it just doesn't mean like that. Then their word was good. I was dealing with a lawyer a couple of months ago, and he said something about the word. I said, well, I know what it is with you. If it's not on paper for a lawyer, it didn't happen. He looked at me. He said, yeah, I believe that's right. That's just the way it is today. If you don't have it in writing, it didn't happen. How sad that is, their word is not that good. So what are we studying out of? Leviticus. And we've studied about the different offerings, and we've got one more to cover. We're going to cover that tonight. And we've talked about the first 3 are the free will offerings that they were given to praise and worship the Lord. But 4, the sin offering was mandatory. So when somebody sinned and they became aware of it, and And the way this is written, become aware of it. Do you think that you know when you sin? Well, I think most of us think like, yeah, well, we goofed up or we made a mistake or we've done this. But this talks about unintentional sin, doesn't it? And if you become aware of it, you're to make these sacrifices as it's laid out here. And so here we're going into number 5, and that's in Leviticus 5, the trespass offering. What is a trespass? What does trespass mean? Yeah, somewhere you're not supposed to be. You're going out of bounds, aren't you? God gives the boundaries, and you're going outside of that. Now, some of your translations may be different here. Any of you have a translation that calls it something different? It's concealing knowledge. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things there. So we're seeing unintended, yes. Sorry, Ruth Ann. Nobody's asking, in the last few weeks, I don't think anybody's asked, what about those sins that we commit intentional? It doesn't say that here, does it? Well, if we went over into Numbers 15, we would find that out. And the word it uses presumptuous sins. And those sins, and presumptuous means really arrogant. In other words, you're arrogant about what you're going to do, and you're just going to sin. And the Lord would have to just deal with it, I guess, because you're just really arrogant about it. They cut them off. They were cast out. In some cases, it was death. Do you remember the 2 sons of Aaron that made the strange fires? They were told not to. They were told exactly what they're supposed to do. They tested the Lord. And they were judged for it. Okay. So let's look at these here and see what the trespass sins are. Ruth Ann, would you read just verse 1 first?
If a person sins in hearing the utterance of an oath and is a witness, whether he has seen or known of the matter, if he does not tell it, he bears guilt.
Okay. So what is an oath? Promise. Yeah. And I think we think of oath being something divine or connected to that. Do you remember when they swear you in as a witness in a court, what they say? How does that end? So help me God. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, well, if they lie, it's God's fault. So help me God. He didn't help them. Oh, no. but that's right. They say, so help me God. So it has something. But this says also, hearing the utterance of an oath and is a witness, whether he has seen or known of the matter, he does not tell it, he bears guilt. So who is the guilt on? I mean, if you tell a lie or oath, obviously it's on that person too. But it's also, if you heard it, it's also on you. Isn't that what this says there? That if you see a crime, you're to report it. Or a lie, or somebody that has committed some falsehood, that we have a responsibility to get that corrected. Yes, Scott?
There's a phrase that's used, and it's been used for years, and it really troubles me. It's called no snitching. Don't snitch.
Don't snitch. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's used to cover all kinds of things. Not rat somebody out or whatever. And yet, that's exactly what this seems to be talking about.
We still, in professions, practice that today. The lawyer-client privilege. It even happens within the Catholic Church. If you go into confession, they have having to deal with that to where they cannot reveal. I mean, you commit a murder, so on, and ask forgiveness for it and tell the priest about it, and he is, according to what they've had. They had a lot of struggle over this, and that's why the courts are for the attorneys and so on. I don't say it's works every time or something, but that is our concept. This is what we teach. And boy, so they can tell us about anything as to, I told attorney one time, and I was talking and so on, and he said something. I said, don't tell me anything that I can't tell someone else. Don't tell me that. You know, because I could protect him, but I wanted him to know that I wasn't in it for anything like that. Just don't tell me. Okay. All right. Let's look at verses 2 and 3, please, Ruth Ann.
Or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether it is the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, and he is unaware of it, he also shall be unclean and guilty. Or if he touches human uncleanness, whatever uncleanness with which a man may be defiled, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty.
Okay. We pretty well understand that one. And touching something dead here, in this case, we were defiled. And one of the things during this time, we've talked about the tabernacle and now the use of the tabernacle, is that the tabernacle and the altar and so would become defiled from any action if somebody had done these actions, because it was to be kept holy and so on. So it tells here that they should not do that. In other words, that is wrong. Okay, let's look at verses 4 through. Let's just look at verse 4 next.
Or if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters.
Oh. So speaking thoughtlessly, and it says to do evil or to do what? Good. So it doesn't matter. The scripture tells us let your yes be yes and your no's be no. But in here, this could be promises. Promises. When you make a promise, do you keep it? Yeah, we should. Sometimes, it's spur of the moment, we'll make a promise just for the situation, and then we walk out the door and we forget all about it. Don't we? Forget all about it. Have you ever told somebody that you're going to pray for them? Then you turn and walk out the door, and that's the last thing you remember about that? Have you ever promised your kids that you were going to do something for them? And you don't do it? And boy, that's a real good way to hurt the relationship between the parents and the kids, because when you don't follow through on your promises, they know it. They remember it. If you told them you're going to take them fishing, they remember it. They've looked forward to it. They're ready to go. And then you decide something else comes up, and that wasn't so important anyway. You've got something more important. How good is your word? I just told you about our ancestors. Well, that just amazes me, and I just love that, to how faithful and how they stuck to their word, and you could depend on them. You could depend on them. when I was pretty young and I would travel to the next town to play baseball, and I'd hitchhike over, and people didn't know me. They didn't know my parents. We lived in a little small town, and I hitchhiked 7 miles to get there to play baseball. And occasionally, and all the people knew was my nickname. Don't ask. No, I'm going to go ahead and tell you. Slick. That's all they knew me by. They're Slick. When I was in the 2nd grade, I had a little ringworm, if you remember ringworms, and I had to have my head shaved. So one of the clowns in the town, one of the smart aleck older boys in town, gave me that name, and it stuck. That's all they knew. They didn't know. But I could tell them, they'd say, "Who's your dad?" I'd say, "Mr. Taylor." And they who knew Mr. Taylor was, and they would just light up. And they would just talk about him and how faithful he was, and they could call him at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he'd come out and work on their tractors or their farm stuff. So when sun came up, it was ready to go. And he would do that. He'd give the shirt off his back when he couldn't even afford the shirt. He had a 6th grade education. But they were dedicated, strong character, and whatever it took to help somebody, they'd help. And money didn't matter. Everybody then was about in the same boat. We were all from a poor neighborhood. We didn't know any better. Kids don't really care. They just have a good time and smile. They don't think of the hardship that's on their parents and so on. We lived in a house. I think fit $25 a month rent. Outhouse till I went off to college. We did have coal running water one time. But anyway, those aren't bad times. We look at them then. I wouldn't want to go back like that. Needless to say, I don't live like. But it's a time to where things were much simpler. We didn't have to make the decision, the choices that you do today. I had a friend from Romania. He was a young boy. The church had brought the family over from Romania back right after Ruth and I got married. And I asked him one day, I said, "Michael, what's the difference here? You've got too many choices. We just making decisions. And do you not do that? Have to figure out what color you want, what size you want. And you just go through all these things." He said, "Over there we don't. We just got what we had and needed, and went on with it." But today, it's a nightmare. You can lose your hair over it if you're not careful, trying to make decisions. All right. Yes.
Mom and Daddy have told the story when they lived in Avoca with snow on the ground, and they walked over to a neighbor's house, a widow lady, Dove was her name, and she was gone. She'd evidently gotten a ride into town. She didn't need any help, but Daddy noticed that her clock was off and needed some work done on it. So they just went in and took care of it and then walked on home.
Yeah. Neighbors.
Looked after each other.
Yeah, that's right. Neighbors.
No locks on the doors.
No locks on the doors. Yeah, those. That's a lot of truth there, Frank. In fact, yeah. And as my grandpa used to say, people had a lot of common horse sense. Now, I don't know what a horse had to do with it, but and I think of some of the words they used to then. When they'd say, "You're much obliged," what did they mean? Much obliged, you don't hear that word. Appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Verses 5 through 13, please. We're going to read it quite a bit here.
Or if a person, and it shall be, when he is guilty in any of these matters, that he shall confess that he has sinned in that thing. And he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed. a female from the flock, a lamb or a kid of the goats as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. If he's not able to bring a lamb, then he shall bring to the Lord for his trespass which he has committed 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One is as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. And he shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer that which is for the sin offering first, and wring its head from its neck, but shall not divide it completely. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. And he shall offer the second as a burnt offering according to the prescribed manner. So the priest shall make atonement on his behalf for his sin, which he has committed, and it shall be forgiven him. But if he is not able to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, then he who sinned shall bring for his offering 1 cent of an ephah of fine flour of a sin offering. He shall put no oil in it, nor shall he put frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. Then he shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall take his handful of it as a memorial portion and burn it on the altar according to the offerings made by fire to the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement for him for his sin that he has committed in any of these matters. It shall be forgiven him. The rest shall be the priest as a grain offering.
So we see here, much like it was on the sin offering for the common people. So based on their economical situation, they could make different offerings on here. And we also saw in the sin offering where if you were a priest, it had to be a bull, and if you were a ruler, then you had a female a lamb or goat. So it was laid out by identity and also social status on here. And we see here that it was to be a female from the flock, a lamb or a kid of the goats. And then if you got down to 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, how were those offered? One's a burnt offering and the other sin offering. So some of these offerings occurred together. In other words, it was very common for that to happen. And 1 ephod of fine flour, ephod is about a bushel, so 1/10 of a bushel. And everybody knows what a bushel is. You know what a bushel basket is?
60 pounds.
Yeah, we used to get peaches by the bushel and so on. And anyway,
And the bush basket kept getting smaller.
it kept getting smaller, didn't it? Yeah, I do remember that. So this was the guidelines for carrying that out. Now, under these we're looking at, these are kind of interwoven. There are moral laws, there are civil laws, and ceremonial laws. And this has a ceremonial and civil, we'll see in just a minute here, but also the moral law in being cleansed from sin and a sacrifice they provided for that. Okay, let's look at verses 14 through 19.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, If a person commits trespass and sins unintentionally in regard to the holy things of the Lord, then he shall bring to the Lord as his trespass offering a ram without blemish from the flocks, with your valuation in shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, as a trespass offering. And he shall make restitution for the harm that he has done in regard to the holy thing, and shall add 1/5 to it and give it to the priest. So the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it shall be forgiven him. If a person sins and commits any of these things which are forbidden to be done by the commandments of the Lord, though he does not know it, yet he is guilty and shall bear his iniquity. And he shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish from the flock, with your evaluation, as to be eaten the same day that he offers his sacrifice, but on the next day the remainder of it also may be eaten. The remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day must be burned with fire. And if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering is eaten at all on the third day, it shall not be accepted, nor shall it be imputed to him. It shall be an abomination to him who offers it, and the person who eats of it shall bear guilt.
Okay. So what is different about this part? There's a restitution here, isn't there? Yeah. And how much is the restitution? Anyone? Add 1/5, 20% more. So, and it could be include money, if you notice there in verse 15. It could be evaluated and you'd have to pay money. So if you stole somebody's lamb or something and that's a sin and it happened to die, you'd have to replace the lamb plus 20%. Yeah, if he had just, falsely collected from anyone, and that he would add to it, though. And that was pretty common back then, that they had to make restitution for what they had done there. No, we don't. We spend more time trying to get out of it than we do. Yeah. But that could be a pretty good penalty to do that, to have to. And what about ignorance? How does ignorance play a role in this? And we talked some last week about ignorance, whether you're aware of it or not. You're still guilty, aren't you? I did find a saying of Jesus, and it's in Luke 12, verses 47 to 48. And it talks about that the servants who knew his master's will and did it not to prepare himself and according to the master's will shall be beaten many stripes. In other words, you know what to do and you don't do it and you sin. But it says also that, but he who did not know yet commit things deserving of stripe shall be beaten with few. So it seems as though the judgment there for ignorance was less than for somebody that knew what the sin was and committed it. But that's in Luke 12, verses 47 through 48. You know, it's important and necessary to remember that one may be guilty of sin without feeling it or thinking it so. Does that make sense to you? So it may be you commit a sin and you don't feel any guilt about it. You don't feel any remorse about it. People can justify and hide their sin. Well, they try to justify. You can't really justify sin, but they try, don't they? They don't. Yeah, John?
I got a little lost in here.
Okay.
Where were the verses about the first day, second day, and third day? Did we read that?
First day.
The sacrifice, eating it, the second day you eat it, third day you didn't eat it.
Yes.
Where was that?
I don't think it's in this here. It was back before, I think. in the different chapter. Yeah, it, it could be in that. You remember the Passover meal was like that too. They couldn't leave any till the next morning, nor the manna. They had to. But there is somewhere that says that.
I just thought we just read that, but I can't.
y-
Did we, what translation do you have? I just got the straight King James, see, it doesn't have it in here.
No, mine's different, but it doesn't have any.
Yours is new and it has, mine's regular King James and it doesn't have it.
Yeah, I did. I've seen it in one of these verses, but I don't remember in this part.
It may be in the next chapter.
Well, if you committed the sin, there was one thing you could not benefit from your sin. In other words, you didn't get to eat of it. So if you wanted to have a big meal, you can go down, sacrifice for your sin and get to eat the leftovers there. In 7, okay. Is that what it?
Tells me it ain't gonna be on the test.
I don't really know, I'm just guessing.
Okay. All right, so maybe we haven't got to that part because there are the other chapters that will cover other aspects of these.
And Paul mentioned that, he said, as a person, he said, but I did it through ignorance. He didn't say it was unexcusable.
Yeah.
You know, but he said, and there's the principle of going from glory to glory to glory, you know, working out our salvation.
Right,
There's today where I am today, I'm not near where I need to be or going to be, but where I am today, I can look back 10 years and go, oh my goodness, that's awful what I did, you know. But at that time, it didn't seem to be sin to me. It wasn't, but that's where I was in my growth.
right.
But now, I mean, you know, Jesus said, the law says don't commit murder. But I tell you, if you hate
To
someone,
my heart.
you're guilty.
Right,
You know, well, there's that principle as we grow in glory and get closer to Jesus, what we did before becomes vile to us, even though at the time, in our ignorance, it wasn't.
wasn't. That's a good point. Yeah, that's really, you've been there. I think we all have, Frank. We've all been that way. So, okay. Let's look at Exodus 29. I want to tell you a little bit of how these, in verse 37, God had given the command back in Exodus here, and start with verse 37, Exodus 29, verse 37, 38, or 39 too. Ruth Ann's looking for it here. 29. This is the way the ceremonial law was set up, and how to use the tabernacle and so on. And this is the way the day began. And he gave these here two, and I'll let her read it first before 37 through 39.
Okay, 37 through 39.
Starts out 7.
But as for the incense, is that
No, it's
the wrong chapter?
chapter 29,
Okay, 29,
verse 37.
okay. 7 days. You shall make atonement for the altar and sanctify it. And the altar shall be most holy. Whatever touches the altar must be holy. Keep going.
Yes, please.
Now this is what you shall offer on the altar: 2 lambs of the first year, day by day, continually. 1 lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. With the 1 lamb shall be 1/10 of an ephah.
That's all right. We just stop there. Thank you. So God had given them this instruction here to offer 2 lambs the first year, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. Now, what they would do, and we've talked about this before, they had to do that every day. It's continuous. It's a perpetual covenant here and a perpetual sacrifice every day. And then in verse 42, it says, "This shall be a continued burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of tabernacle, like a meeting before the Lord, where I will meet you to speak with you." So God had commanded them that they had to sacrifice that every day. And what they would do, they would take a lamb and tie it to the horn of the altar at 6 o'clock in the morning, and at the 3rd hour, which is 9 o'clock, they would sacrifice that. And that's when they would blow the trumpet and open the gates to the temple area. And then at twilight, which has been determined to be 3 in the afternoon, or the 9th hour, they would sacrifice the second one. The second one would be tied to the altar at noon, the 6th hour, and then 3 hours later would be sacrificed. That gave the priest time to see if there's any blemishes in the lamb or the sacrifice. So these other offerings occurred in between those hours. So there was things going on every day, most likely. But at least 2 of them was offered during that time. Those times match up with Christ's crucifixion. He was put on the cross at the 3rd hour, 9 o'clock. He was actually sentenced that morning somewhere around 6 o'clock, and then on the cross at 9 o'clock, and then at noon turned dark, remember? And then on the 9th hour, he died on the cross. So God has set this up back in Exodus for them to make these sacrifices and offerings during that time. And all of these 5 here fell in within that. Now, sometimes we get this confused with the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement, and if we went to Leviticus 16 and looked at that, it says for the high priest was to sacrifice a bull for he and his family, and then he was to bring 2 goats or 2 lambs to be sacrificed. One, they cast lots. One was to be the scapegoat. The other was to be the sacrifice. And that was on the Day of Atonement, which was the 15th day of the 7th month, which in the religious calendar, which actually falls in the 1st month of the civil calendar. And that usually happens in September or October of each year. So who do you think the scapegoat was? Barabbas was. That was the example of Barabbas, sure was. And who else? Me and you. Me and you. All this is very symbolic to Christ and his crucifixion. God had already provided these particular procedures. So these things aren't just to be doing something. They really have a meaning to them. And when you study that and start putting that together and seeing how that works, you begin to understand the Bible more. You get to understand how it's laid out as to the different segments and their meaning for being done the way they were. God had a plan. He had a purpose. And he put that plan here. And that was part of the plan. So why do we study this? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, to see how terrible sin is and that blood, there's no remission of sin without the shedding of blood. Yeah. And very graphic, too. Very graphic. And how sin destroys and tears down our lives. I've heard people say, well, you can make a marriage better than it used to be. I think that's just awful. A marriage can never be better than it should have been. Now, you might get better than it used to be, but if it was, it's pretty bad back here, isn't it? When there's sin or betrayal involved in it. So it can never be as good. You can't sin and make things better, I guess is my point. It's just not going to happen, folks. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. Any other questions or anything? Brother Josh should be back next week. So thanks for being here tonight. And if there's nothing else, we'll close out here. Father, we thank you for your time and for this time and to study your word. And we know that much is studied in Leviticus and Numbers and so on. But Father, it's there for a purpose. It's there for a reason. It shows your plan and how you laid it out and how much you loved us and that you provided a way through Christ. And we know that the law was given to us to lead us to Christ. And Father, we thank you for that love from the very beginning. When it would have been, from our perspective, so easy to give up on us. But you continue your word and your promises, and they never, never fail. And there is no other. There is no other help. You are our hope, our strength, our fortress, our everything. And we thank you for being that and caring for us and watching over us and continue to guide us. And Father, teach us, guide us, and keep your eye upon us as we go our different ways. And to you be the glory. For it's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.